We have been talking about process for years now. And
Yeah.
I remember we had kind of a 3-step process that seems so quaint now. But recently, through the hiatus and really, celebrating your success and thinking about how I want to approach the work, I was adding steps, and it's things that, make sense. And I just wanted to go over it with you because it's up to 9 now, with 9 steps on the process.
I know we're 3 away from just being the step program. Maybe we shouldn't be mentioning that, but
That's right. Well, we have a full baseball team of steps.
That's right. We have a full baseball team.
This is my attempt, just for everybody out there. My day job is as a training manager, and I manage training for a rather large company in the United States, specifically around how to get people to do their jobs well, be productive, make a lot of money, etc. The goal is to do the job safely, and so I'm always looking for process steps that can be not automated but sort of standardized. And that's just my go-to, right? That's what I want to do. And when you take that and you look at a creative process and say, well, you can't standardize a creative process. I mean, I kind of agree, but I think there are stages that a work goes through or that you go through in creating the work. And that's really what we're talking about. So when we say process steps, it's not this kind of rigid, you must do X, Y, and Z, but it's sort of the phases that you kind of move through as a story moves from inception to completion. So with that, why don't we get started?
All right. So I've got your list in front of me. We've got the drafting, which is, that's the basic. You need to have something to work with first. So the drafting, we're going to be roughing out the first pass. Ugly. Yes, you got to be comfortable with the fact that it's going to be pretty ugly, but it's something to work with.
Yeah, and the trick here is, everybody knows, you have to draft something when you're writing. But for me, the great aha moment was whole idea of roughing out. So I had a teacher who was really a mentor of Scott Farron's. Her name was Deborah Monroe. And she was at Texas State University. And she was a big proponent of this concept of roughing it out. And she used to write, I think, longhand. But the idea is, it doesn't matter what the quality is when it comes out. Just get it out on paper. I had another teacher at Texas State who used to just say, just tell me a story. Like, everybody seemed to be saying versions of the same thing. Just get the idea on paper. It's going to be ugly. Pieces of it may glitter, but it's going to be ugly. Just get it out. And that's one of the things that's been really hard for me to convince myself to do. So I'm still struggling to be okay with putting something really rough on paper. But that's the whole idea about roughing out. And so we call that drafting.
That's my favorite part. We talk about this all the time, My methodology for working in the Smoke Long March Micro Fitness workshop was to be getting up in the morning, nice, bright and early, letting that first cup of coffee sink in, and then finding out what the day's prompt was, and then just getting at that draft. And it is my favorite. We talked about it last week, how I would be so excited about the draft. Now I'm getting into this space where I'm like, well, I don't want to ruin that draft, because it had such good vibes with it. Now I'm going to think about it and ruin it. But perhaps these 9 steps are going to help me. The next 8.
Yeah, and that's what you're really leading into, which is an expert level segue there, is the second step, which is?
Well, and then the next step number 2, we have revising. So we are multiple stages of reimagining, of redrafting, and retelling. So, when I first read this list, I had some questions about that. So tell me more about that, about multiple stages of reimagining, how you meant that.
Yeah, for the work that I've done well, it obviously doesn't flow out exactly the way that it ends up as a published story. You have to try different things, and some of those things may not work. And that's all I'm thinking about is, okay, well, we told the story that we had that kind of kicked off this journey. Maybe it was a core concept in the roughing out where it's like, oh, I really want to see what happens if an animal turned into a human. go. And then you sort of rough
Mhm.
out whatever it is. And then when you come back to it, now it's like, all right, well, maybe I'll take something from the outside world and apply it to this idea and see if that happens. Maybe I'll add a new character, a new foil or a new buddy or a new antagonist, whoever, and try that. I don't really like that. Well, let me try this other direction. And that's what I'm talking
Yeah.
about, is really trying different things and seeing what sticks. One of the things that I find troubling, again, from me and my process, is I tend to lock in on only one possibility for the story. And I laser focus on that one thing, and I drill down on that one thing. And usually that one thing is reflected pretty well. But then when I
Yeah.
show it to other people, they're like, well, this one thing is cool, but what about this? What about this? What about this? And oftentimes it's just me not allowing myself freedom to explore, freedom to think. I was just so laser focused on the one thing that I had tunnel vision. So this is the opportunity it's like an institutional excuse to go nuts, because you really can't break the story. It's not a complete story yet. You've roughed out the idea. So you kind of captured whatever that pixie was on, that was, well, that's a better way to say that.
The muse.
Yeah. The will-o-wisp in the forest, you sort of chase that, and now you're trying to turn it into an actual story.
Yeah. One of the things that I've been getting better at is this section. Now that you've put in words to that and sort of talked about it, it kind of reminds me, lately I've been able to take a step away, after that first draft is out, and then it comes back to the revising. Some of it is me just basically, playing with where sentences go. Wait a minute. Does this section need to happen? Does this third section, can that maybe be part of the first section? Should I start off with this? Maybe that first line should be the title, and then we can just get right into it. So yeah, the revising is something that I'm starting to have a lot more fun with, because it's almost as if you have a collection of sentences. Now it's like, all right, what's the best order for this to go in? Of course, there are so many other things to do with revision. You just talked about that stuff. But yeah, for me, the revising, I'm getting a little bit better at not holding that first draft so precious. And I know that's very hypocritical, because I just said that I sometimes hold that first draft too precious, and I don't want to ruin that sort of, capturing that flame in a bottle. But I am getting better at the revision and saying, you know what? I could take this, move this over here, do this, do that. Oh, and I spelled that word wrong.
Right. Yeah, but the revision is really, like if you just break down the word, revise is to see again. And so that's the idea, is to take this initial idea, this initial kernel of a story, and then see it again, maybe from a different point of view, maybe from a different angle, but to see it again. Which is different from the way that I was approaching it, which is really the third step. So we have the roughing out, right? That drafting. Then we have revising. So we've gone through multiple iterations of the story. We probably latched onto the one that feels the best to us. And that's when we need to move into that third step, which is
the editing. Oh, when the thing is a thing and you want people to read, you got to clean it up a bit. Make sure the language is refined and smooth off those rough edges before you send it to your reader group. Oh,
Yeah.
A reader group, eh?
Exactly. Yes. Not just a single person, but, a number of people. It doesn't have to be 20, but, at least 4, I would imagine.
But sometimes, Art, it does feel like you are 20 people when you're reading my work. So
that's the
you are my
schizophrenia
reader
talking.
group.
No, but this is where I conflated those two steps. In the past, I would have jumped straight to editing, thinking that I was revising. So just again, to take a step back, the roughing out, just getting it out on paper, that drafting process of spitting out the story in full, and then revising to see what's the best angle to approach this idea, what's the best collection of characters to sort of express this thought or this emotion. Once you've latched on to that, now it's time to really edit the language and get that down to something that is as tight and clean and ready for publication as you can get it, so that you can show it to the reader group. And I think I would combine steps 2 and 3 into the same kind of smushed activity and not do either of those well.
Right. I see what you're saying. All right, that makes that. I get it. All right, yeah.
So then once you've got the thing the way you think, and look, at that point, typically for me, I think it's perfect and ready for publication, and here we go, buddy, let's roll it, but it usually isn't. which is super frustrating because with any kind of distance on the story, you'll see that it's not quite ready for prime time. But that's
Yeah.
why, after you've done the drafting, after you've done the revising, after you've done the editing, that's when you can go ahead and do, what's the next one, Tim?
We have soliciting. You're going to send your work out to beta readers and ask for some feedback. Now, you're going to let the piece sit with them for a little while because you need some time here so that they can read it, so they can think about it. And don't put pressure on them to read it too quick. How many times have I sent Art something that I said, hey, Art, I got to put this in like 5 minutes. I got to submit it to a magazine. Can you take a quick look at it? Give them a little more time than that. But you can go work on something else while your readers are working on the piece that you submitted to them.
Yeah. And this is one that I often saw as the finish line, and you can see it's step 4 of 9. So it is nowhere near the finish line. But, in my earlier iterations, I thought once I had honed the language down to the glittering gem that I wanted it to be, it was done. I can send it out. And the reading, having other people read it was almost a formality or, a series of collecting accolades. Well, that is not true at all. It couldn't be further from the truth. What you're really looking for in the soliciting process is sending it out to people who you think are going to respond well to it, and some people that you're not really sure, people that are going to give you tough feedback. You want that tough feedback. Now, you don't want people who are trying to be negative or trying to take you down a peg because they have some personal beef with you. You're looking for people who are good critical readers, especially if you write genre fiction. You want people who read the genre that you're writing, because that's really valuable feedback. But essentially, the soliciting is your opportunity not only to throw the story over the fence and get it into the hands of other people who can tell you empirically whether it's accomplishing what you want it to accomplish, but it's also about giving yourself time to forget the story. And that's probably the biggest part of it. Because once you forget the story as a writer, you come back to it later, not remembering what your intentions were. And you get a really good understanding of what it is, not what you meant it to be.
Yes. And that's always something that's so important for me, is to be able to take that time away from a piece. We've talked about that before, where you're so into it that, or maybe I should say, I'm so into it that sometimes I forget that other people need to read it. And I might have cut out some details that are integral for someone to understand the story. So yes, you got to take that time away from folks.
And typically, if I were only writing one story at a time and every one of these stories had a linear process, this would be maddening, mind-numbing work, because I'd get to this part of the process. I would send it to the people who are readers for me. And then I would sit on my hands and wait until they got back to me. And then I would have to wait until my mind forgot the story. And then, and only then, would I be able to get back into it. Well, gosh, the better way to do that is to go start working on something else. You've got more story ideas. Yeah. And so you see how these famous writers, like I think Joyce Carol Oates, we had mentioned that she does this. As soon as she finishes writing a draft of a book, she immediately starts on a different book. And it's a really great way to cleanse the palate. So whatever activity you want to take on, as long as it's a way that you can sort of pull your focus away from the thing you just did, focus on something else for an indeterminate amount of time, and then when you're ready, come back to this work fresh and ready to dive back in. And what do we call that step, Tim, when we come back to the work?
We call it returning.
We do.
Because, of course, once the feedback comes in, you're going to have to read through your piece again with their suggestions. You have to read it as a reader, not a writer. Now, that's something that I struggle with. You're going to have to kind of keep an eye on the flaws, the strengths, assess what feedback to keep and which feedback to discard, and then get cracking on things. And getting that feedback and then looking at your piece again as a reader is so difficult for me, but I do feel like I'm getting a little bit better at it. So this is really one of the things that has been fun for me, again, having just come out of that Smoke Long workshop, where reading folks' comments on my pieces has been a revelation. There will be times where several people will say something about your piece, and you kind of go, you know what? I had a little red flag that was in my head that I did not pay attention to, and here we are with these folks telling me about it. And so it's really, really, really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, when I was in graduate school, I remember reading feedback on my stories because we would receive written feedback as part of the workshops. So not only am I getting, the verbal feedback in the room, but I'm also getting, a healthy amount of written feedback. And I remember going through those and I was just too close to the work. It was too soon after I had originated it and gotten it out the door. And it almost felt like little jabs or cuts when people were just trying to be helpful, saying what they liked and some of the things that didn't work for them because I was so wrapped up emotionally in having just created that. And it's this perfect little baby bird that I'm ready to fly out of the
Yep.
nest. I just wasn't prepared to receive the feedback. Guaranteed, if I'd waited a month and then come back and read it cold, yeah, I probably would have agreed with a lot of what they said. So that's one of the benefits of letting this stuff sit and coming back to it fresh. So I do recommend that as intriguing as that feedback might be, if you've sent out the work to solicit feedback and you're going to do the returning, collect the feedback, but maybe don't read it. Just put it in a folder and go, thank you so much. I can't wait to get to this when I get to step 5, returning, or whatever you say. But maybe
Yeah.
hang on to that feedback in a separate folder. And then when it's time to go back to that particular story, go ahead and open up all the feedback, and read it fresh. And frankly, I would read the story first, then read the feedback. Cause then you kind of have good context on what it is they're talking about. And I think you're going to get a much cleaner understanding of whether what they're saying matches what you're trying to do and that sort of thing. So that's the value in the returning. And there's no set time frame for that. One of the reasons, Tim, it might be tough for you to do that is you write such small pieces and you're writing constantly. Maybe you're not giving yourself enough time away from a certain piece before you come back to it, but you do have a lot of things that are in the works right now. So maybe it's getting easier for you because you're just churning so many different pieces that it becomes simpler to come back to an old one fresh,
Yeah, and that's something that we have talked about here before where it's nice to have a pile of stuff in the drawer because when something hits you and you can take it out, you have enough time to look at it again. And if you've got that feedback that you've got from other folks sitting with it, yeah, it's just like reopening a brand new piece, but you have that distance to be able to say, "Wait a minute, hold on a second. I get what they're saying here.
Yeah.
I should probably do these things." Yeah.
Exactly. And this is where we start the looping process within our sustainable writing process because step 6 is
Revising 2.
That's right.
Electric Boogaloo.
Thank you. Yes.
Yes. Sometimes when I get folks feedback, we were just talking about the fact that you might want to put folks' comments in your piece aside so that you can get to them when you want to get to them. But sometimes I just can't wait. And when I read feedback, I'm like, oh, it's a revelation. It's like, that's right. That's right. I should have done this with that. I should have connected B and C to D. And then you're just like right back into it. So sometimes that returning step and the revising 2 step, boy, those things get blended so quickly because I'm just like running to that piece to say, what a great idea. I think I know how to fix that. It's the ideas come in so many different ways. It's also very exciting when you get feedback from your reader group and they might mention something that just clicks something in your head that makes the gears pop into place. And then you're like, I got it. I know how to do it. So there are many times when I have gone from returning to the revising 2 step very, very quickly.
Yeah, and that's fair because if you come back to it cold and you read some feedback that energizes you, it's almost like you are starting fresh with new energy. And why would you allow that to dissipate? So absolutely dive back into that thing like it's brand new. What I always find interesting is that I'll either not discard, but I'll sort of find something more interesting than whatever originated the idea to begin with. There may have been a central through line in that first roughing out stage that there's a ghost of it left in the story, but something else has kind of taken over and I'm really racing towards that. And that's when this second revising really allows you to say, well, here's the meat. Here's what's really working. It doesn't matter what originated the idea. Here's, you've worked on it for a while. You've put it in front of people, had the courage to put it in front of people. And they're saying this is the thing that interests them. All right, cool. Well, let's do that. And so that's why the revising step there is really good. So you may do multiple drafts at that stage after it's been in front of people already. There's no problem in breaking a piece down and revising it again after it's been in front of people. In fact, it's kind of the gig,
Yeah. Yeah.
So after we do that revising, what's next, Tim? Step 7 is?
We get editing number 2. We get the
Yes.
edit. You got to get those. You got to make those edits.
Yeah.
You got to make sure everything's tight.
Exactly. It's the same process again. That iteration, that's kind of sustainable approach is really just this core loop of drafting, revising, editing, and proofing. And we haven't gotten to proofing yet, but basically the editing is to get it clean so you can put it in front of people again. And that is something that you can do if you want. Now, the process that we're laying out doesn't require you to send it out to people again. And here's why. If you've already sent it out once for feedback from trusted readers, there's a chance, and we've mentioned this before, there's a chance that if you send them the same story again, they're going to be looking for their original feedback in your revision. And if it's in there, they're going to pat themselves on the back and think it's great. If it's not in there, they may just recommend that you do it again. So there's kind of a diminished returns from sending the same piece out to the same people over and over again. So honestly, I think one time is sufficient. Just kind of get a gut check on what's working and what isn't. They're going to give you that, and then trust your instincts and move forward. So that's why we move from step 7 editing to step 8,
which is proofing.
Yes.
You got to get nitpicky with the grammar. You got to get the word choice, the formatting. And in this part here, I think it's, for me, when I'm in those final stages, this is also where I try to read it aloud a lot, just so that I can hear how it sounds.
That's a great, great suggestion. I don't read it aloud, but I have my computer avatar read it to me. And the reason is that, Tim, you're a good performer. Some would say a great performer, but you are a performer. And I am not. And so I don't want my lack of performance to artificially, change the way that the text reads. In my head, it reads differently from when I read it out loud, but I really like having the computer avatar read it to me, because then I can be more passive and just absorb it. So I'm not trying to sort of figure out where do I emphasize to get across my vision. No, I'm letting the thing read it to me and seeing where the language trips up. Well, then once we've gone through all of that process and we've got something that we feel really good about, last step is
submitting. Get that puppy out the door. Get it. Now you got to do all the work, the real work of finding the right lit mags to put it to.
And this is where you have tons more experience than I do, Tim. So what kind of pearls of wisdom can you give folks? I know when we talked to Bethany Jermel, she had a lot of really good insight. In fact, I think she has a workshop on how to do this. So you can always check that out as well. But Tim, you've gotten published a lot in the last couple of years. What are some of the keys to success on that?
I think it's just trying to find the places that seem like a good fit. There are lit mags out there who take a wide array of styles, of genres, and we've talked about it before. Submittable changed my life when somebody told me about that, where you can go in and you can try and find lit mags and what they're looking for. Chill Subs is also a really great resource to try and find lit mags. It's really about doing the research and reading lit mags, and knowing what you're submitting and who you're submitting to, because you got to read those guidelines. You got to read the about us. You got to read what they're looking for. And it takes a little bit of time, but you can sort of develop, I have it on my notes app, a little collection of maybe 10 to 20 lit mags that I really, really enjoy and that I really think my work could someday be in. And so it's just about kind of keeping track of those places that you want to be and aiming for them.
Yeah, that's great advice. Bethany had talked about making, I think it was like one day a week. She sort of puts time into figuring out where stories or poems, in her case, can go. And so she devotes herself in blocks of time to the business of being a writer. And I think that works really well in this linear process, because we're really just looking at one particular story. But if you're working on multiple pieces at the same time, you're going to have kind of a stable of pieces that have made it through the steeplechase and they're in the submitting phase. And that is your opportunity once a week to carve out a little bit of time and investigate, where do you want your work to appear and how do you get it to them? So all of this kind of works within the framework that we've talked about with other very successful people. And these 9 steps, I think, are going to revolutionize my approach to writing, because I see now that I've broken it down into these 9 steps that I wasn't doing some of them and that I was kind of smushing together others into these larger, unmanageable pieces of work. And of course, now I understand why I got frustrated because I was trying to do too much at one time.
Yeah, and having a sort of workflow for yourself can be very, very, very helpful. I would be very happy if I could just have a workflow that was steady and stable and worked for me. But right now with my schedule, and maybe there are a lot of folks out there that have the same thing with their own schedule, life, work, whatever it is that you do, it kind of upsets that a little bit. And I think that sometimes when I get a little bit too far away from feeling like I'm doing good work, I think I just need to get myself back to these, like a very basic step, a very, very, very basic process. Hey, I'm not feeling this. Where is it at in this 9 steps? Where is this piece in this whole workflow? You know what? It's right here. Maybe I need to do a little bit of revision. Think about it from somewhere else. Maybe I just need to send it out to somebody.
Yeah, and you can move things back and forth. It is a linear process that moves forward. But if a story takes a turn, or if you like a new direction that maybe somebody recommends to you and you go into a new level of revision, it can sit there for a long time. Like none of this is so static or rigid that you can't use it to your advantage. So the main point of the process is just to keep track of where you are in progressing the story to its best version that you can produce without getting lost or confused. And so one approach that you might consider is to have a list of all of the works that you have in progress right now, perhaps on a spreadsheet, and you can identify these 9 steps in, say, one tab on the spreadsheet, just to remind you, here's the 9 steps. And then you can identify on the tab where you're actually keeping track of all the stories, what stage is it in? That way kind of what work is where in the process. And that way, when you carve out time to sit down and write and go, what am I going to write today? You can take a look at what's in progress and choose from that.
Yeah, and that's something that I need to get into is a spreadsheet like that. I simply have a submissions spreadsheet. I don't really know how much I've got in my little folder of works so that I know where they are in this order of progression. So yeah, maybe that's something. And like we were talking about with Bethany Jarmel, it's the management side of being a writer that you really also have to pay attention to, because you got to know what you got and you got to know where it's going and you got to know what stage things are in so that you can be a little bit more successful whenever you want it to be.
Yeah. And not everybody's an organizational freak. And some people are actually turned off by the idea of having a spreadsheet. It's a dirty word. It's really just a list of what you're working on. And you just want to have a centralized list of what you're working on and kind of where it is in the process so that you can organize your thoughts when it's time to write. So probably the most important thing you can do to approach the work as a professional writer is have that kind of management structure so that you can be as productive as possible.